So the last step in this process is the authorization. So in the previous video, we saw how to create the login mutation that allows us to log a user in, and that login mutation sends a token back. So that token is then stored by the browser either in local storage as part of the cookie, and then every time when a request is made by the browser or from any application that wants to essentially access the GraphQL endpoints that require authorization, it needs to send that token. So we need to make an implementation now that actually checks whether a token exists if a request comes in, and then act on it, make sure that it's valid, and then return some data as well. And this is when we're going to go back to this me in the context object that we have essentially commented out quite a while ago. So what we want to do is make sure that someone is actually logged in, and if they are logged in, we want to add the logged in user's details to the context so that they exist. So then what we will do here, and as opposed to just have that me variable, what I'm going to do is create a function called, how should we call that? Let's call it get logged in user, that will access to the request, and this request here is the request object of the Express application. And because it has access to the request object, we can also access the request headers. So we can say request.headers and then read the value of a header, which in our case is going to be a custom header. So every time when we want to make a call to GraphQL, we also need to send this custom header with the request, with the XOR token, and the value of that should be the token itself. Once we get the token, and just make sure that we have the token, so if token, then I'm going to write a try catch block here and return a verification. Otherwise, I'm just going to catch all the errors and say throw new error, session expired. So how I'm going to do the verification? Well, what I'll do, I'll bring in the jot npm package again, so require JSON web token, and that has a method called verify, which we can access and pass in the token. And the second parameter is either a public key or a secret, but we are going to be using the secret because that's what we've been using. So that's process.environment.jwt_secret. Okay, so this should make sure that the token that we have is valid. So where should we call this method that we wrote? Well, we should call it here. So I'm going to add me to the context and call get logged in user, and I'm going to pass in the request as well, right? So we're actually passing in the request that gets passed on here, and then that's where we access the header information. Perfect. So now that we have the me object placed back to the context, we can start and access that in the resolver. So how are we going to do that? Well, what I'll do is just show you a very interesting use case for this. So as opposed to going back to the user resolver, actually, I'm going to go back to the car resolver. And what I'm going to say is that we must have a registered user, a registered and a logged in user in order to create a car. So if we are just some random user, we won't be able to add the car. However, if we are logged in, we'll be able to add the car. And by add the car, I mean we'll be able to call this create car mutation. So how can we achieve that? So let's also use me here. And what we can do with that, we can say if not me, then throw new error and say not authenticated. Otherwise, we can build up the car object just as we did it before, and we can return models.car. That's fine, but there's one thing that we will also need to do here. Remember how the cars table looks like. The way we've done this using SQLize model association is that a user ID automatically got added to the cars table, even though we only use ID, make, model, and color. So this is the perfect scenario to add a user ID when we create a car. And how can we do that? Well, we can very simply say the user ID should be me.id, right? Because me itself is the actual user object, because our token contains the user object. So when we log in, so let me walk you through this again. So when we log in, we return a token, right? So here's the user resolver, and when we call login, we then create a token where we pass in the entire user object. And based on that user object, we build up a token that has the ID, the name, and the username as its payload. So we sign it with this payload. That means that in app.js, when we verify the token itself, we will be able to deconstruct the payload. So in here, the token will actually contain the user object, right? And when we put that to the context of the Apollo server accessible via the me property. So then we come here, we extract the me property from the context, and we can access all the properties that we had on the original user object, which is ID, name, and username. And with this way, when we insert the car, we will automatically attach the association between the user and the car. So the currently logged in user will also be the owner of the car. Whereas before we were not able to do this because we could insert only a user, or we could insert only a car. But now we have attached these two functionalities together. So this is really exciting. Let's save this file and let's see what happens when we go back to our playground. Oh, we get an error. Request is not defined. And that's in app.js when we're calling. Oh, I know why. I'm sorry, I forgot to add one thing here. So for the context itself, we can pass in the actual request headers to the context, so that this context now becomes an arrow function. And because it has become an arrow function, it needs to return an object, and the way you return objects from an arrow function is by wrapping this in parentheses. Okay, so let's now save this. Now we are not getting any errors. Let's go back to our playground. Let's refresh this interface, and okay, let's do a test. So first of all, I'm going to register a new user. That's going to be Kate. Okay, so registration is successful. Let me now run a query just to verify everything worked. We do have Kate there, and if we do car make, then we will see that Kate doesn't have a car. Let's fix this. How can we fix it? Well, we need to create a mutation. And this is what we did before, right? So we want to create a mutation for create car, where we create the make. Let's make this a Vauxhall, a model Astra color black. Right, so this is now create car, and it must return the information from the car. So let's return make. If we run this, we get not authenticated, right? So we can't call this mutation because we did not log in. We don't have a token. So let's fix that. How can we fix it? Well, I'm going to add a new mutation called login and pass in the username and the password combination for Kate. So username is Kate, password is test4. And remember, this returns a token. Let's run this, and here we have our token. So what we need to do with this token is to copy it, and when we do this mutation, this will still not work, right? Because we're still not sending the actual token. But notice this section here that says HTTP headers. So we can type in an HTTP header here and say xauth, and I'm forgetting what we called it, apologies for that. So that was, where am I looking at? Right here in app.js. Xauth token. So xauth token with the value of the token, right? So I'm passing in this HTTP header, and let's now run this mutation, and look here, create car, make Vauxhall. So this car has now been created. Let's comment this out, and I'm very excited. So let's see, let's actually see user ID 4, which should be Kate, and now Kate does have a car. We have achieved exactly what we wanted. We now have a functionality where we can use the me context, and only logged in users, authorized users, can create cars using the GraphQL mutation.